Alright, so today's video is going to be on bodybuilding and more so just a bigger picture fitness industry trend that has been annoying me, not just for a little bit, but kind of for a while at this point. And to cut to the chase of what this trend is that's annoying me, it's the concept of applying the blanket statement that every lift in your program, you should be trying to get a maximal stretch on. This massive emphasis on full range of motion and always going for a deep stretch has been taken to an extreme. And the reason this has happened is because people don't know what they're talking about and they don't understand the nuances. This is creators and followers alike. The false information and the misunderstanding of this relatively simple concept that gets spewed out there is insane. It still blows my mind that we're halfway through 2024 and this has been trending as a topic for years at this point, and nobody wants to talk about it. There's a valid reason for that. It's because those videos get no views. I made one before and it didn't get any views. That's not me being jealous or envious or anything, but that's me saying, like, nobody wants to watch a long form video on resistance profiles and stretch mediated hypertrophy and anything in between those two concepts. So I understand it. But at the same time, the content creators that post like bite-sized little short form stuff that doesn't really offer any value, they love to like hype up these little buzzwords like stretch mediated hypertrophy, for example, or like biasing the stretch, get a deep stretch, get full range of motion. And these videos blow up, but nobody actually understands the concepts behind them. So people take these as like a rule of thumb, like entire blanket statement that they follow and apply to their entire program. So, all right, getting a bit ahead of myself, so let me take a step back. Basically, the problem that I have with this misunderstanding of going for a stretch at all costs and when to go for a stretch and when not to go for a stretch is that people don't understand this concept. Like I said to start this video off, what I would say here is it's a good thing to go for a stretch on a lift, but you have to know what lifts to do it on. And that's what people don't understand. So when you go for a stretch at all costs, that is obviously the problem. It might seem hypocritical at first coming from me, but if you think that, you might not understand the nuances of resistance profiles. So an example of when a stretch is a good thing is when there's going to be peak resistance in the stretch on that lift. So if you're doing something like, maybe a JM press, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that lift, but a JM press, obviously when you're coming down, your elbow is going to end up above your shoulder and below your wrist at peak resistance. So the moment arm is greatest, so the horizontal distance between the axis, so your joint, and the load, which would be the bar, that horizontal distance between the two is greatest at the bottom. Guess what? When the tricep is most stretched. So that's a length and bias lift. When you have a length and bias lift and you're looking to get a good stretch, you want to go for a deep range of motion. That's why you see when I do a JM press, I go all the way down till the bar basically touches my chin. Humble brag, but it's hard to get there now because my biceps are growing. Humble brag. So, but I try my best and I'm still getting the deepest stretch that I possibly can. So that's a good example of when you should go for the deep stretch, is when it's a lengthened biased lift and you actually have good tension in the stretch. There's also examples where people go for a super deep stretch when they don't need to because they don't understand that they don't benefit from a stretch there. And not only would they potentially not benefit from it, it might actually be counterproductive. So let's say for an incline dumbbell bench. So let's say you're on a 45-degree incline. So you're leaned back and you're doing your dumbbell press. In a lift like this, people love to talk about the deep stretch, get that deep stretch on your upper chest and everything, and that's cool and all. But another thing people don't understand about this lift is peak resistance is about halfway up the press. So by the time you're all the way at the bottom and you're in a position to get a deep stretch, the resistance isn't actually that great, and it's probably not even beneficial. And like I said, if you're doing it with a certain style, it might even be counterproductive because it will hold back the weight that you can use. And not that heavier weight is always more potent or any of that BS that people like to spew as well, but you're holding back your force output is what I'm trying to say here. So if you're in an incline dumbbell bench or lean back at 45 degrees, peak resistance, guess when that is? That's about halfway, like I said a few seconds ago. So in this incline dumbbell bench, peak resistance is here. The dumbbell's like up by your head. This is when your upper arm is parallel to the floor or when it's perpendicular to your forearm. By the time you're in a deep stretch, that moment arm is much smaller. I mean, your hand is basically right by your shoulder, so, and your elbow stacked beneath it. So there's not much tension all the way down there at the bottom. So while you might be like technically stretching your chest, there's really no resistance on your actual chest, so there's not much of a benefit to it. And if you go down too deep to where you have to shift your forearm around and you're no longer stacking your elbow under the grip, at this point, to press out of a position like that where you have much less leverage, you're going to have a much harder time getting through peak resistance. So on like a mid-range or a short-range bias lift, depending on the actual resistance profile itself, but usually anywhere kind of falling between those two resistance profiles, the key for growth is to have a stable setup and to get through peak resistance. So if you were just to go, say, from like the top all the way down to here, this is like a top half shortened partial, that's probably not going to do much because you're not actually getting down to and slightly through peak resistance. So to get the most you can out of an incline dumbbell bench, for example, to use the same one, you want to go beneath peak resistance, but you don't want to go so low to where, yes, you're getting a better stretch, but you're also losing leverage because your forearm and your upper arm and your elbow kind of have to shift around to try just for the sake of getting that deep stretch. So that's a good example of when getting a deep stretch isn't beneficial, because the key for a lift like that that's mid-range biased, like I said, is to have the most force output that you can to get through peak resistance. So that's an example of when it wouldn't even just be like a neutral kind of like, I don't know, it doesn't really do anything good or anything bad, it's just kind of like a waste of time. It might actually be counterproductive in a situation like that. So like I said, getting through peak resistance is key, and then on a length and bias lift where the resistance profile is putting maximal tension in that lengthened position, that's when it's key to actually go for a deep stretch. But nobody understands this, and they think applying that concept to every lift makes a ton of sense. And there are little ways where you can kind of hack around this to get a deep stretch from maybe a lift that isn't length and biased. Like, there are definitely instances of that, but in the vast majority of cases, it's not very practical, and most people do not know how to do that properly. And a lot of lifts is just, there are just bad choices for that anyway, so you're not really going to get any benefit from it. And another issue, arguably the biggest issue of this entire misunderstanding of the concept of stretch training and resistance profiles, is it doesn't just change the way that you view and execute your current program, it completely blurs your perception when it comes to exercise selection. So an example of this would be, let's say if you think that just having your muscle in a stretched position while you train it is the end-all be-all, this would basically eliminate something like a preacher curl from your, I guess, your vision of what lifts are good to have in your program for hypertrophy. So if you're always focused on having your muscle in a stretch, like for bicep training, all you're going to do is incline curls and Bayesian curls. And even with those, most people do them incorrectly anyways. But then if you automatically go into it with the assumption that you have to have your bicep behind you for it to be an effective lift for your biceps, you've already ruled out a preacher curl, which is not only shown in actual evidence, but I think anecdotally, it's a time-tested classic lift that I'm trying my hardest to prove is one of the best bicep builders, if not the best bicep builder out there. And now that lift is just completely outside of your tunnel vision on stretch-focused lifts. So that's an issue in its own, where you're already starting to eliminate certain lifts from your program just because you misunderstand the concept of what training the muscle in a stretch position and a length and bias lift position actually is. So an example of this is, an example of how prevalent this misunderstanding is. I was watching I think it was an Instagram reel. This is a handful of months ago, so I don't know if you'll see it anymore. Some people might have seen this reel. I'm not going to name who it was, but the person that posted this reel was one of the biggest people in the fitness industry following-wise, and they were talking about incline curls in this video. I went to the comment section, and one of the comments that had like a couple likes but like a bunch of responses of people disagreeing with this guy was him saying, actually, incline curls aren't length and biased because the resistance profile is still mid-range to short biased. And everybody in the responses was just completely ratioing him. And that proved it to me right there, that the one person in the comment section that actually understood how resistance profiles work everybody told him he was wrong. Those comments were completely ratioing him in terms of likes, like clearly showing that everybody also didn't understand the concept, and not only didn't understand it, but was like, nope, you're wrong. Like, these people think they understand this concept like the back of their hand. It's just, they just don't. I don't know why this is the case. I don't know why people are so confident in their understandings of resistance profiles, but it really is odd how this has gone on for so long at this point. So it was kind of sad to see this person just all alone in this massive comment section of a bunch of people that clearly didn't understand it. And I don't know, it's just sad to me how still so many people don't understand a relatively simple concept. So if you want to learn more about resistance profiles, the resource I would recommend is actually my own video on resistance profiles, not to like self-plug, but it's just one of those things that people love to use the little buzzwords of like, oh, get a deep stretch, get full ROM, stretch mediated hypertrophy. Like, there's all these fancy buzzwords, but nobody actually explains the concepts because nobody wants to sit down and watch one of those videos. So I bit the bullet. I put a bunch of hours into a video that completely flopped, but it still is a gem of a video in my personal opinion. I'll link it down in the description of the comments if you want to see it. I can't remember what the title was, but I know what the video is, so I'll find it. Either way, if you have any questions or any comments on this topic, let me know in the comments. I'll keep an eye out.